Late October is usually when my job feels most mechanical. I'm 43, a compliance analyst, and quarter end turns my brain into a checklist. My wife and our son went to her parents' place for 5 nights, and I stayed back because the reports don't care about holidays or family plans. Our house sits in a quiet cul-de-sac where even the dogs seem trained to bark on schedule. I kept my evenings structured. Dinner at 7, dishwasher on eco-cycle, porch light timer clicking off at exactly 10:15. If you prefer realistic accounts like this, subscribe for more quiet, grounded horror stories. Upstairs, my office glowed with 2 monitors and a row of spreadsheets. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed steadily, a low, constant sound that made the rest of the house feel even stiller. The setup was simple and practical. I needed uninterrupted hours with my dual monitors, so I worked late, took short breaks, and tried to treat the empty house like a temporary hotel room I was responsible for. I didn't mind being alone. It was cleaner, quieter, easier to focus. Each night before bed, I did the same circuit: back door, front door, side gate, garage. I set the alarm in stay mode and listened for the soft confirmation beep from the panel in the foyer. At 11:02 p.m. the system armed the way it always did. The only minor nuisance was the backyard motion light, which sometimes flared on when stray cats cut through along the fence line. The second night, I noticed something small while brushing my teeth. The hallway light downstairs was on, the dimmer set just above the midpoint. It wasn't bright, more like a dull wash of light creeping up the stairwell. I stood there with toothpaste foam in my mouth and tried to replay the last hour. I remembered locking the doors. I remembered turning off the kitchen. I didn't remember the hallway at all. The easiest explanation was that I'd been distracted by a late email and done my usual routine out of order. I went down, clicked the switch off, and the sound of it echoed a little too clearly in the quiet. Over the next 2 nights, the house kept presenting me with small resets, the kind you usually blame on your own fatigue. A kitchen cabinet door left ajar in the morning, just enough to catch the under-cabinet light when I walked past. The thermostat adjusted from 69 degrees Fahrenheit to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, the blue backlight showing the change like a correction. I started reviewing my own habits the way I'd review an audit trail, where I'd been, what I'd touched, how likely it was I'd done something without noticing. It didn't feel like fear yet. It felt like troubleshooting. If you enjoy slow-burn, realistic horror, leave a like. Then the backyard motion light began to follow a schedule. It activated at 2:17 a.m. 3 nights in a row. When I checked the security app, there was no breach, no door sensor triggered, no obvious movement on the camera feed. But the cameras buffered oddly between 2:14 and 2:19 a.m., little gaps in the timeline that made the motion light's glare feel staged, like someone was turning a page before I could read it. On the 4th night, I paused at the top of the stairs instead of walking down like I always did. It wasn't a sound that stopped me. It was something else, air pressure, a change in the house's texture. The way a room feels when a window is cracked somewhere you didn't crack it. I stood on the landing and looked down into the foyer, which was dark except for the faint glow of the security panel. The HVAC didn't cycle when I expected it to, and the silence in between felt deliberate. I thought about the garage interior door, how it sometimes needed a firm push to latch. I stood still for a full minute, listening for anything that would justify going back to work and dismissing the thought. At 2:16 a.m., the backyard motion light triggered again, and this time it stayed on longer. The bright spill washed the fence line in harsh white, turning every leaf and post into a sharp-edged shape. I checked the camera feed from upstairs. The backyard looked empty, but I knew the angle missed the narrow strip beside the house, the part where the siding meets the fence and the camera can't quite see. I could have called police right then, but what would I say? My light turned on, my camera buffered. I wanted confirmation, not speculation. I went downstairs quietly. The house felt colder on the first floor, the kind of temperature difference you notice in your wrists and ankles. In the kitchen, I saw it immediately. The door to the garage was slightly open, less than an inch, just enough to show a thin line of darkness and a seam of colder air. I distinctly remembered pressing it shut earlier. I stepped closer and tested it with 2 fingers. There was resistance, a soft catch, as if something had been wedged and recently removed. Then I heard it, a controlled exhale from the garage side. Not loud, not dramatic, human, like someone trying not to be heard. I stepped back without rushing. I locked the interior door, hands steady enough that the deadbolt didn't rattle, and I armed the system to away. Upstairs, I watched the garage window panel from the landing. Headlights passed slowly across it, not sweeping like someone driving by, but sliding, as if a car had eased forward in small increments. Then the light faded, and the street outside returned to its ordinary darkness. I called non-emergency, because there was no broken glass and no forced entry, and I couldn't say for certain what I'd heard. 2 officers arrived and did what I would have done. Checked the perimeter, tested the doors, looked for obvious damage. They found none. Outside, they noticed faint scuff marks near the side gate latch and pointed out the screws looked slightly loosened, the latch misaligned like it had been worked at. I told myself the same story they implied without saying: attempted theft, someone checking for an easy opportunity, moving on when it wasn't easy. Still, I left every light on until sunrise. Morning flattened the shadows in the driveway and made the house look innocent again, which was almost worse. Later, when I reviewed the footage with daylight in the room and coffee in my hand, the pattern felt cleaner and more unsettling. The camera buffering began seconds before the motion light activated each night, like the feed was being interrupted in advance. I realized the garage interior camera had been disabled months earlier during renovations, and I'd never reactivated it. It wasn't negligence I could blame on stress. It was simply a blind spot that had stayed blind because nothing demanded I look at it. A few days after the police visit, I found a thin wooden shim on the garage floor near the track, a 3-inch unfinished wedge, the kind used to level a door or hold a gap. When I picked it up, it scraped dryly against the concrete. No fingerprints were recovered. Nothing that turned it into proof. I replaced the garage door system, installed additional cameras, upgraded the strike plates, and tightened the side gate until it closed with a harder, final sound. Nothing similar has happened since. That's the part people expect to be comforting, and it should be. But some nights I wake without an alarm and glance at the clock to see 2:16 a.m. glowing in dim red digits, as if my body is keeping time for something my mind refused to name. I don't use the porch light timer anymore. I switch the light off manually and check the garage twice, watching the brief pause before the bulb clicks out and listening to the house settle into silence. Share this with someone who appreciates grounded horror and subscribe for the next account. Early March tends to feel transitional where we live, the trees still bare but the air losing its winter edge. I'm 44, a regional sales director on a hybrid schedule, and that week I was home alone. My wife was at a medical conference across the country, and my daughter was away on a school trip. Our split-level house sits at the edge of a wooded subdivision, where tall pines form a dense line beyond the back deck. Evenings followed a predictable pattern: treadmill at 8 o'clock, shower, review forecasts on my laptop, bed by 11 o'clock. The wind moved steadily through the pines, a constant low rush behind the house. The sliding glass door to the deck had vertical blinds, one slat slightly bent and always out of alignment. If you appreciate realistic, grounded accounts like this, subscribe for more. I stayed behind to manage quarterly reporting. It was easier without conversation or background noise, and I've always worked best in quiet spaces. Each night I set the house alarm at 10:47 p.m. on the panel by the garage entry, checked the deck door, and confirmed the dog was still boarded for the week. Without him, the house felt larger and more hollow. Occasionally, the attic made expansion pops when the temperature dropped after midnight. The hollow tick of cooling ductwork after the HVAC shut off became more noticeable in the absence of voices and television. None of it was unusual. It was simply a house adjusting to March air and an altered routine. On the third night, I finished my run and wiped down the treadmill as usual. When I stepped off, the display read 1.2 miles. I was certain I'd stopped at 1.0. I stood there, breathing steadily, trying to reconstruct whether I'd accidentally brushed the controls. The rubber belt coasted to stillness beneath my shoes. I reset the machine without much thought. It felt like a minor glitch. On my way to the basement for a file, I noticed a faint dirt smudge near the matte gray basement door frame, a crescent-shaped mark at about knee height. I assumed it was from moving storage bins earlier in the week. Over the next 2 mornings, the basement storage light was on when I came downstairs. I rarely used that switch, and I was careful about lights. Once could be forgetfulness. Twice felt like a pattern. The garage trash bin lid was slightly ajar one morning, though I remembered pressing it down. Around 3:11 a.m., according to the security app logs, there were brief Wi-Fi disconnects, 3 minutes at most, between 3:11 and 3:14 a.m. on consecutive nights. I inspected the exterior in daylight. No forced entry, no broken locks, no disturbed mulch. Cold air pooled at the bottom of the basement stairs each evening, and I began pausing there longer than necessary, letting my eyes adjust before switching on lights. If you prefer slow burn, realistic horror, leave a like. One night, instead of flipping the basement light immediately, I stood halfway down the steps in the dark. The air felt different, humid, faintly scented. I smelled detergent, the clean, synthetic smell of recently washed clothing. It didn't fit. I hadn't done laundry in days. When I reached the utility area, I noticed the washer's drain hose was no longer angled toward the floor drain the way I'd positioned it. It had been nudged slightly to the side, enough that I recognized the change without understanding it. A subtle drip echoed from exposed plumbing. I remember thinking, with surprising clarity, that someone could use a basement without ever disturbing the main floor. I decided to test the idea instead of reacting to it. The following night, I worked late in the basement office intentionally and left the upstairs dark. I wanted the house to appear empty. At 2:58 a.m., while reviewing a sales forecast, I heard deliberate steps above me. They were slow and measured, not the random contraction of wood or the settling of ductwork. I turned off my desk lamp and sat still, phone in my hand but silent. A few seconds later, I heard the sliding deck door open. The sound was unmistakable, the muted roll of the track and the soft clack of vertical blind slats brushing together. I pictured the bent slat shifting out of line as someone passed through. The steps moved into the kitchen area overhead. They paused directly above the basement door. The knob turned slowly. I could hear the internal mechanism, clockwise pressure without latch release. I had locked it earlier. I watched the handle from below as it shifted slightly against the frame. The movement stopped. For nearly a full minute, nothing happened. I held my breath not out of panic, but because any sound from me would confirm what the dark might be hiding. Eventually, the steps retreated. The sliding door closed with the same controlled movement, no rush, no stumble. I remained still for 20 minutes before calling police. When they arrived, the exterior showed no forced entry. They suggested I may have left the door unlocked earlier in the week. At dawn, the officers pointed out a partial shoe impression on the deck near the railing, a muddy half-print with no clear size. The wood smelled damp in the early light. I changed all the locks within 48 hours and installed additional door sensors. The explanation offered was practical, an opportunistic trespasser checking properties along the wooded edge. It made sense statistically. I did not mention the detergent smell or the repositioned washer hose. Those details felt harder to categorize, harder to place within a simple theft narrative. I boarded the dog for the remainder of the week and kept the basement door locked even during the day. Weeks passed without further incidents. The Wi-Fi outages stopped. The treadmill mileage never shifted again. One Saturday morning, while reorganizing tools, I found a blue microfiber shop towel placed neatly atop the workbench. Precisely folded, edges aligned. I never use shop towels, I keep paper rolls. The basement dehumidifier hummed steadily in the background, indifferent. I stood there longer than necessary, trying to recall whether I'd brought it down from the garage at some point. Nothing else was disturbed. Nothing else was missing. It was the neatness of it that unsettled me more than any damage would have. My wife and daughter returned, and nothing else occurred. The house resumed its usual rhythm, filled with conversation and movement. I replaced the vertical blinds on the sliding door, but I left one slat slightly bent, almost as a reference point. I keep the basement door locked now, even when I'm home alone during the day. Sometimes I pause before opening it, listening for changes in air pressure or faint sounds below. At night, when the wind presses softly against the sliding glass, the bent slat casts a thin diagonal shadow across the floor, and I find myself watching it longer than I should. If this account felt grounded and unsettling in a way that lingers, share it with someone who appreciates that kind of realism, and subscribe for the next one. Midsummer always makes our house feel more exposed. I'm 41, a financial auditor finishing out a remote contract, and that week I was alone. My partner had flown overseas to visit her sister for 8 days. The house is a 2-story brick place facing a commuter road that stays busy until late evening. I work at the dining table, which looks directly through the front window toward the street. After 11 p.m., the traffic thins gradually, engines fading into longer stretches of quiet. The Ring doorbell camera beside the front door has always been mounted slightly crooked, angled just a little too far to the right. If you value realistic, grounded accounts like this, subscribe for more. I had a tight reporting deadline, so late nights were expected. During the day, I kept the blinds partially open for natural light, and I left a few delivery packages scheduled for midweek. The first night alone, at 1:32 a.m., a single notification chime cut through the silence. I glanced at my phone and saw the alert on the screen. Motion detected at the front door. I opened the feed. No one was visible. The porch was empty, streetlights steady. I replayed the clip twice and saw nothing but the usual grain of night mode. I assumed an insect had passed too close to the lens and went back to work. The next morning, I reviewed the footage more carefully. Just before the motion indicator activated, a shadow passed across the lens. It was brief and shapeless, not clearly attached to a person. There were no vehicle headlights at that moment, no passing cars to explain it. The image flickered slightly, the kind of static shimmer common in night vision mode. I told myself it was a glitch. Cameras compress, buffer, misinterpret light. I adjusted the motion sensitivity slider from its previous setting to medium-high and closed the app. The explanation felt sufficient, if not entirely satisfying. Over the next few nights, the notifications repeated within a 2-minute window, between 1:30 and 1:32 a.m. each time. During the day, packages arrived as scheduled, but I noticed one cardboard delivery box had been rotated 90 degrees from where I'd left it. I assumed the courier had shifted it. Twice, I found the side yard gate unlatched, though I distinctly remember securing it after taking out trash. The cicadas beyond the fence were loud at night, masking smaller sounds. I began checking the live feed before turning off interior lights, studying the porch for movement. The crooked camera angle made the right edge of the frame deeper in shadow than the left. If you prefer slow burn, realistic horror, leave a like. On the fourth night, I muted my phone and sat in the dark living room instead of working. I wanted to see the alert in real time. At 1:31 a.m., the notification appeared again. This time, I opened the live feed immediately rather than watching a recorded clip. For a second, nothing moved. Then the camera shifted upward slightly as if nudged. It was subtle but undeniable. The porch light moved lower in frame, the horizon line adjusting. Through the microphone, I heard a faint scraping sound, like plastic against brick. When I checked the device later, the doorbell looked marginally straighter than before. I stayed in darkness that night, leaving every interior light off. At 1:34 a.m., I heard the front door handle depress slowly. It wasn't forced or rattled, it was tested. The matte black Schlage deadbolt held firm. I watched from the hallway, careful to avoid the window's sight line. The metallic click of the handle returning to neutral was quiet, but distinct. A thin object slid briefly between the door and frame, something narrow probing the gap near the latch plate. It withdrew just as slowly. My phone vibrated again. This time, motion at the backyard camera. Whoever was outside moved methodically, not hurried. The front porch remained empty in the feed, but I could sense repositioning, evaluation. Minutes stretched without escalation. No pounding, no attempt to break glass. Just testing. Then, through the blinds, I saw headlights appear across the street. A sedan idled briefly with its lights off, only the faint outline visible against the dark curb. After several seconds, it rolled forward without illuminating the road and disappeared at the corner. The house returned to stillness, as if nothing had happened. I called the police once the car was gone. A patrol unit arrived within 15 minutes. Their spotlight washed over the brick facade, bleaching the front steps in white. They found no forced entry, only a faint indentation near the latch plate on the door frame. The officer mentioned similar late-night testing, reported in nearby blocks, people checking for unlocked doors rather than breaking in outright. They advised upgraded strike plates and brighter lighting. After they left, I installed a temporary wedge alarm at the base of the door and left the porch light on until dawn. The street felt unusually quiet without passing traffic. In the days that followed, I reviewed earlier footage and noticed the same sedan passing the house at 1:29 a.m. on each of the previous nights. The plate was unreadable in low light. The doorbell camera, once visibly crooked, now appeared perfectly straight, though I never adjusted it. I wiped the casing with a cloth and noticed a small, fingerprint-shaped smudge near the edge. After the police presence, the nightly notifications stopped. The side yard gate remained latched. Packages were undisturbed. The commuter road fell silent at night without interruption. My partner returned, and nothing further occurred. I keep the blinds fully closed now, even during the day. Some nights I wake just before 1:30 a.m. without an alarm and reach for my phone before looking out any window. The screen glow illuminates the bedroom ceiling, and I scroll through old notifications until I find the familiar timestamp, 1:31 a.m., still lingering in the history. I tell myself it was opportunistic crime. Still, I check the live feed first. If this account stayed with you, share it with someone who appreciates grounded horror, and subscribe for the next one.